الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم افتح إلينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام ونعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So today's session I wanted to just make it short and brief. Instead of continuing with the text of كيمياء السعادة, I thought maybe I'd explain some of the terms regarding the heart that you would commonly come across in the Quran, what they mean or what are their vast array of meanings, contextual and specific as well. And this would help you when you come across some of these ayat and you try to understand what they're speaking about. They'll help you understand them better. It goes without saying that language is predominantly the foundation, the essence of human civilization. Modernity tends to use the phrase science is the hallmark of human civilization because they believe that science is the thing that has brought humanity to a level of higher intelligence and the technological advancement that we are currently boasting as the achievements that we have attained. Of course, we would argue, and Islam does argue against that it is not science that is the hallmark of human civilization, it is language that is the hallmark of human civilization. Because without language, the science itself could not be learned. And even in the subjective aspects of sciences, every science has its language. And each of these subjective aspects have their terms and definitions and how they are applied and understood. So we say that language is the hallmark of human civilization. And we're not just talking about language in the formal aspect of the shapes, symbols, the sounds that language take. When we say language in modernity, it is always understood as English or French or Spanish, Arabic, Hebrew, Urdu, and so on, Chinese. These are all semantic fields or semantic forms that language take, and these are driven by the different peoples and where they come from and what they are accustomed, the phonetics that they are accustomed to, and the meanings that they associate with the words they use in their vocabularies. What we're talking about is language in its essential form, the kind of language that acts as a medium of relaying what is internal to the human being, that is unseen, has no shape or form, has no dimension, or as far as the physical world is concerned, and we take those aspects, those inner aspects of our being, and we bring them out into the created world. We associate those meanings to symbols that share a common meaning, so that when we can bring them out into the world, the words that we use, the sounds that we make, have a common understanding, and people can then comprehend each other. That's what we're talking about as language being the hallmark of human civilization. It is that core aspect that really embellishes who we are, because without that, we cannot express ourselves. And that's insofar as what's inside coming out. But additionally, we cannot bring anything from outside into us without that language, because it's how we interpret reality. It's how we gather what's out there, associate what's out there with these words, with these symbols and shapes, and which have meaning, and we take that meaning into us for our understanding. So in the sciences, the reason why modernity and science in modernity cannot really come to a conclusion as to what consciousness is, what heart really is because these are things that cannot be documented insofar as an exact science is concerned. And so the terms also that are associated with these metaphysical aspects don't have a specificity in them in terms of saying that we cannot definitively define what the heart is, or what the soul is, what the mind is, but we can use metaphoric language to give it a descriptive. So the terms that the Quran uses when it comes to the heart, these are descriptive terms. And this is what really needs to be understood, is that if you're looking for an exact science, you're not going to find it here in terms of what a laboratory would dictate for specificity. But if you expand your horizon of understanding, then the metaphorics are sweeter than the formulas and symbols generated from the laboratory use of these sciences. So there are many terms for the heart, and I want to focus on primarily just 4 of those. And these 4 are found in the Quran, and they're also found in Islamic sciences of tazkiyah and tasawwuf. And I know a lot of people have an issue with the term tasawwuf because they associate it with Sufism. But really also this needs to be understood, because tasawwuf is not a specific term. It is it's a very broad term. And it's a beautiful science in and of itself, because it deals with the purification of the soul and the heart. Undoubtedly, there are going to be additions that come into that externally that are not of it. Similarly to how Islam is all-encompassing, and there are additions that are brought into Islam that are not of Islam. We call that bid'ah. So I've got these 4 terms on the board, if you can see them. If you can't see them, I'm going to send you. I also have a diagrammatic representation. I'll explain exactly how that diagram works. So the first term that I want to look at is the Sadr. Sad, Dal, and Ra. Sadr. And this is commonly translated as breast or chest. So in the Quran you will find ayat. The most common ayat, for instance, is Alam nashrah laka sadrak. Did we not expand for you, O Muhammad, your breast, your chest? And in Surah An-Nas, alladhi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas. They are those who whisper into the breasts, into the chests of mankind. This does not refer to this upper torso, chest of the body, of the fleshy body. It refers to the Sadr in that metaphoric likeness of the chest within which is contained the heart, right? So the Sadr is what Ghazali equates to Al-Mishkat in the ayah of Surah An-Nur, Mathalu Nurihi ka Mishkat. There is a niche, and that niche is on a wall, and that wall is the Sadr. This is the point of entry of the information that is received from Alam al-Shahada, the observable world. The information received from the eyes and the ears and the nose and the senses and all that. It enters through the brain, it goes in through its processing, and then it enters through this niche, this opening, wherein it goes towards the heart. So in that diagram you can see there that I have got the dimensions of this inner being. Those 4 circular, those semicircles there, those are the inner dimensions of the being. This is just a diagrammatic representation. You can't really draw it out. In physics we have this, I would say it's a problem, because we can represent one-dimensional things on a 2-dimensional surface, and then we can represent 2-dimensional things on a 3-dimensional surface. We can likewise represent 3-dimensional objects on a 2-dimensional plane. For example, I can draw a chair which is 3-dimensional on a piece of paper which is 2-dimensional. Unfortunately, we cannot represent dimensions higher than that, because we don't, number 1, know what they look like. Number 2, our physical sight is limited to 3 dimensions, so we cannot really understand what 4 dimensions must be like, but we can represent them. We can represent a 4-dimensional square, which would be called a tesseract, in a 3-dimensional space. It's only going to be a representation of it, like a shadow, right? So this is like a shadow. What we're doing is trying to represent something that's of a higher dimension. And when I say this, I'm not talking about a mathematical dimension. We're not talking about an earthly dimension. We're talking about a spiritual dimension. right? So we're trying to represent that in a flat surface here just for the sake of understanding. So on the upper side of this diagram, you can see Alam al-Shahada, and then on the lower side, you can see Alam al-Ghaib. And on the one side, you see the Nafs, and then on the other side, you see Ruh. And then in the middle there is where this inner being is located. You have the outer shell, which is the Sadr. That encompasses the Qalb, which is the heart. Now, the heart is contained in the chest. Then you have got Fuaad, and I'll explain what that is. And then you have got Lubb, which is the innermost dimension. And there are differences of opinions. Some scholars say that the Fuaad is the outer, the Qalb is the inner. Others, which is a more stronger opinion that I found, is that the Fuaad is the inner and the Qalb is the outer. Doesn't really matter. Everyone is trying to make sense of this. So on this other side, you see here, there is Shahwa and there is Ghadab. And that's classified under the Nafsiya portion of it. Between the opening of the outer world, the point of opening, which is the senses, the physical body, and that's the gap of the outer self, the nafsiya portion, the self. That's where the ghadab and the shahwa are commonly found, because the shahwa and the ghadab are not the inner dimension of the self. They are the outer dimension of the self. And of course, the inner dimension is where you will find the aql. And you will see that it begins from the point of the sadr and goes inward. And this is because the Sadr is almost like an in-between portion. It protects the heart inwardly, and it is what receives everything and filters it as it comes into the heart. And this is why we say that the shayateen, whether they are from the jinn or from ins, from mankind, they cannot penetrate the heart. They can't touch the heart. The heart is protected by Allah. And so what they do is they try to throw their waswasa alladhi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas. They throw it towards the chest, the breast, the spiritual breast, the sadr. And they hope that it will enter through that niche, the mishkat, the opening. They hope that it will enter through. They hope that it'll hit the mark and it will penetrate the heart. So it's like somebody who just says a bunch of things. They're all derogatory things or offensive things, reactionary things. He's trying to upset you, or she's trying to get you started. But then some of the stuff works until that one thing that they say, it hits the mark, right? And you get agitated. That's what they're trying to do. That is yuwaswisu. It is a constant, right? It's a constant whispering that they're throwing on your chest, on your breast, hoping that it will penetrate the heart and upset you. So at the point of where the nafs and the sadr is, if you look at that line there, that is the mishkat. The mishkat has got two aspects. There is the inner mishkat and then there is the outer mishkat. The outer mishkat is the senses, and the scholars will usually use the eyes as the best exemplification of that. That the eyes are things that really encompass reality visually. That's the first mishkat. That's the point of entry of your light information. Photons in light intensity, light color, temperature, texture, and all that stuff. It goes into the nafs, which is the net, as Ghazali explained, is the net for the senses. It receives all that information. And then there's the second mishkat, which is the sadr. That's the point where the aql begins to interpret what information has been received. And it brings it in to the hub of understanding. The qalb there, if you follow the second line there, it goes to the term, I made a mistake there, it should be a az-zujaja. I wrote ar-rujaja, I missed the dot. So it's az-zujaja. Az-zujaja means glass. So this is the nature of the heart, is metaphorically described in Surah An-Nur as az-zujaja. It's like a glass. And the metaphor is a beautiful metaphor because glass in its natural state, in its raw form, is opaque. And so things which are opaque cannot allow light to pass through them. But when you put the glass through a process of polishing and cleansing, it eventually becomes transparent, and that transparency allows light to pass through it. So this process of polishing the glass, this is the tazkiyah, removing the blemishes and removing the dings and the kinks and all that, smoothing it out so that it becomes clearer and clearer. And the clearer it is, the more light that enters into the heart, the better a person understands and comprehends. And of course, the final portion there is Al-Misbah. And this contains the Fuaad and the Lubb. Al-Misbah, Ghazali again interprets that as the lamp of the intellect. So it is the thing that ignites from internally, from inside, wherein the thoughts and the emotions are, where the intellection between the thoughts and emotions takes place. That's where the aql is really ignited. Right. Is there any question up until there? I'm going to explain these terms in a bit more detail from this point. Any questions as far as the diagram is concerned and these layouts?
What does the word Mishkat mean?
Mishkat is a niche, like a gap in a wall, right? So like a fissure cliff wall, and then there's a thin crack that you could pass through. That's a Mishkat.
So the shayateen just try to hope that their waswas goes through the crack and not the outer wall.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a bunch of kids throwing rocks at the cliff wall and hoping one of them just goes in, which is interesting. The way they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran. It was just a young kid who was throwing rocks in at the cliff wall, and he wanted to throw one and sort of hit a basketball point or whatever. I don't know. He just wanted one of the rocks to enter one of the caves, and he hit his mark, and that's how they discovered that there were some scrolls in there. But that's basically what it is. It's trying to see if they can hit a mark.
Could like guilt and shame, like you say you're fine, you're good, and then all of a sudden you do something which you think was wrong, right? And then you have some guilt and shame, and then all your thoughts start going everywhere. Like, so is that like similar to how they got in somehow because you didn't do that certain thing? Like, say you go to a bathroom and then you forget to wash up, and then you leave like, wow, how did I forget that? And then all these thoughts come in like, oh, you're bad, you're this. Could that be like, oh, they hit the mark?
Yeah, it can be in that way. So while you're going through the process, the algorithmic process of your activity, the ideal situation is that you're sober and you're consciously aware of each and every step in the process. But then different kinds of thoughts enter your mind. You are thinking about something else. Shaitan will usually try to divert your mind in one of those aspects so that you miss a step. And then further down the line, you will be, oh, I forgot this. Oh man, what am I doing? What am I thinking about? Why can't I focus on this? So what you're doing in that situation is you're blaming yourself. And that's known as Anafsalawama. All right? The blaming self, the intermediary position of the nafs. That's a good thing in one way. It's also a bad thing in another way. The good thing is that the fact that you're blaming yourself and you're feeling regret about it or remorse about it shows that you're sincere in fixing yourself, right? So that's a mujahada. You're constantly struggling against the lower side of the self. Yeah.
And the lower self, you say, oh, it's fine,
Yeah.
everything is fine. So when there's a situation where, say, you sin and you're around other people doing the same sin, they're like, oh no, it's fine, man, but you're in a state where you're just like, no, I'm like, you just start going like kind of crazy, but they're just like, nah, you're good, man, you gotta be softer on yourself, you gotta be, does that show the difference between like each other's hearts?
Yes,
they're trying to convince you to be at a lower state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what the difference is. The fact that you will not be content, like you will not be satisfied, you'll be constantly agitated until you fix it. And that's why we say that that's a good sign that you're actually blaming yourself is a good thing, because blaming yourself requires you to self-reflect. It requires a self-criticism, which is the ego will prevent you from doing that. So the fact that you're doing that is a good thing, and you should encourage yourself to continue doing that. Obviously, you don't extend the boundaries till you condemn yourself, but blame yourself until the problem is fixed. But the heart will remain agitated until there is a resolution. Yeah. That's anxiety the nature of the human being is that he's born in anxiety. One of the terms that we come across is, I'll explain what that anxiety portion means.
Anxiety, guilt, and shame is kind of like defensive mechanism Allah created.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like pain on the skin, right? Pain is not a horrible thing because it alerts you that there's something wrong. Obviously, it hurts. There's you don't want to experience pain, but pain is, in some cases, it's a very good thing. There's an interesting poem by Khalil Gibran, a Lebanese poet. He speaks on pain, it's very beautiful when what he says. Pain, he says, your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Even as the stone of the fruit must break, that its heart may stand in the sun, so must you know pain. And could you keep your heart in wonder at the daily miracles of your life, your pain would not seem less wondrous than your joy. And you would accept the seasons of your heart, even as you have always accepted the seasons that pass over your fields. And you would watch with serenity through the winters of your grief. Much of your pain is self-chosen. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore, trust the physician, drink his remedy in silence and tranquility, for his hand, though heavy and hard, is guided by the tender hand of the unseen. And the cup that he brings, though it burns your lips, has been fashioned of the clay which the potter has moistened with his own sacred tears. It's a very deep poem. In other words, your pain is from you. As Imam Ali said, دواؤك منك وما تبشر ودواؤك فيك وما تبصر. Your medicine is from you, if you could feel it. Your medicine is from you, if you could see it. The pain is from you, and it's meant to alert you that there's something wrong. You need to fix it. It's not altogether bad. It's not altogether evil. Yeah. So if you're blaming yourself and you're feeling that sense, it's hurting you. It hurts your ego, but it's a good thing that it's hurting your ego, because that tells you that you are doing the wrong thing and you need to fix it and not do it again. Okay, so the terms that we want to look at, inshallah, I'm going to take the most difficult of these and the most common of these first, and that's the term Fuaad. The fa, the hamza on the waw, the alif and the dal, Fuaad. And you'll find this in many places in the Quran. It's often translated as heart, and this is because it is part of the heart, but it is a kind of state that the heart is in. And the word itself, fa'ada, means it's like to burn flesh, to sear it. So the meat that is roasted on very high heat, that's what it means linguistically. The word fu'ad for the heart means that it's the heart that has been inflamed with emotion. It is the heart that is just strife with emotion. Now, this kind of emotion is the pure emotion. It is not the reactionary emotion. It is not the kind of emotion that is triggered by external elements or influences. It's the emotion that is true. Whether it's a blameworthy emotion or a praiseworthy emotion, it's irrelevant. The point here is that the fu'ad, this is the innermost aspect of the qalb, is the kind of emotion you feel that you can actually associate an intrinsic value, not an extrinsic value. So if somebody says something that you found offensive and you got angry, that kind of anger is an extrinsic emotion. It's an emotion that has an extrinsic value. But if, let's say, you saw something that was, let's say, blasphemous in nature, let's say somebody was torturing another human being and you felt anger because of that, then that kind of emotion, although it's anger, has an intrinsic value, because that scene there, what you're witnessing, is disturbing you on a much more deeper level. It's not superficial. So I think that's a better word. The kind of emotion that it's being referred to here is not superficial emotion. It's deep set, it's deep rooted. Such kind of emotion is often felt within, like, family members. When somebody passes away, someone who's close to you, you feel that sadness, that grief, that kind of emotion. People who tend to fall into disparity, although on the other side, same circumstance, Somebody passed away, but they fall into this sort of a disparity, right? Oh, why did he have to die? And God is merciless, astaghfirullah, and all these kinds of things. And they start wailing and shouting and screaming. That is a superficial emotion. That's not in the heart. That is being demonstrated as though I'm feeling emotion. That is probably being driven by a whole number of different sources. It could be guilt, maybe that person just didn't take care of the other person. Now they are reacting to it. They're trying to show, no, I was a deep caring person about this individual. But it's an extrinsic value. It's just hollow. It's shallow. The other emotion that you feel that is deep set in that instance is an intrinsic value, is a fuad. It's the heart that has been inflamed by that sadness. So the best example I could give you in the Quran is the situation of Musa, Musa's mother, when she witnessed Firaun's wife taking her own child in that moment. So this is the love of a mother for her child, and having to witness somebody else take that child and be completely powerless to do anything about it. And so the best descriptive that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us is a beautiful descriptive. وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى فَارِغًا, that her heart, this Fuad, was inflamed with that emotion. And it became empty. It became farigha. Like she could not focus on anything else. That emotion was so overwhelming. It was so inflamed in her. She couldn't think of anything else. She was completely almost losing it, right? And she would have done something very terrible in that moment. وَإِنْ كَادَتْ لَتُبْدِي بِهِ, she would have disclosed it. She would have revealed the secret. Kawwada means, kawwada kadat comes from kawwada, which means to pile up to a breaking point. So it was like she had reached her nth, right? And she was about to just, I don't care what happens, I want my child back. And Allah says, لَوْلَا أَنْ رَبَتْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا, she would have disclosed this and ruined everything. It would have possibly resulted in Fir'aun killing Musa as a child, because that's what he had set out to do at the time. He had decreed that every Jewish born child would be killed because of the prophecy he was given. She would have let everything go if Allah had not intervened in that moment and strengthened her heart. لِتَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, that she became amongst those who have belief. And what is the essence of a believer? It's not just saying, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, I'm a believer. It is a deep conviction. And in Islam, we say that the testimony that you make as a believer has to transcend rationality and penetrate the heart. This is known as al-i'tiqad. It has to really set into the heart. And this is what we have is the science of aqidah, is to tighten that belief, to make it rock solid, unshakable. No loopholes, no points of deviation, nothing that will steer you off course. It's certainty that you cling to. The believer is not somebody who just has testimony on the tongue. Testimony on the tongue is a requirement, right? But it's somebody who has his heart, has faith in his Lord, and has amana, has trust, which is amana is one of the root meanings of the word iman. It is having that trust, that amana on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that in that moment, irrespective of the circumstance, whatever's happening to you, however genuine the emotion is, it is the trust in Allah that saves you from falling into a state of disparity, from losing yourself. Because people do, they fall into a lapse. And that depression really gets to them and they go insane. It happens, right? The iman strengthens you, strengthens the heart to hold you, keep going. Trust that Allah is going to take care of this thing for you. Because in that moment, all sense and rationality is gone. All logic is gone. She cannot think to what outcome is going to result from her actions from that moment. So true intellection is also blocked because of that. This is the negative aspect of Fuad.
I have a question.
No? Mm-hmm.
the self is blaming itself, is that aspect of the Fuad?
In some cases, yes, because in the heart itself, you've got the intellective process takes place between thoughts and emotions. Thoughts are rational and emotions are obviously emotional, right? So you could be feeling a sense of guilt and remorse. That's an emotion. You could be feeling you could be thinking of a lapse in sensibility. Like that was a very stupid thing to do. I better fix it, right? You're blaming yourself. You're calling yourself an idiot because of what you did. That's more intellective in the sense of thought, of logic. But in the sense of, I feel bad, man, I shouldn't have said that to him. Let me just apologize. That's the emotional aspect of it. And that could be in the Fuad as well. So the Fuad here has got those two meanings. There's the compartment, so to speak. There's that dimension of the human being's inner heart. And there's also the state that the heart can become because of that. Since the heart is always, changing, taqallub, it's always shifting, changing its states, it can become a fuadic state, so to speak. Yeah, where...
All of a sudden you're fine with the activity all of a sudden, but then logically and emotionally it overtakes you, and all of a sudden you're bawling your eyes out, you're scared, you want to get out of the situation, and that feels like a Fuad type of...
Yes. Yes.
Really complain, like you can't think of anything. You just want, and like you said, the amana, that's the only thing that can really save you.
Yeah. You fall into that state of like you just go insane and the thing is that because your heart is inflamed at that point, you can't think straight. You don't know what to do next. Yeah, so even fright or fear can overcome you in that state of emotion, can make your fuad become inflamed with fear. And somebody who's involved in an accident, for example, the trauma has upset that individual to the point that they can't think, they can barely recognize anything. The only thing that's gripped their heart, to use that expression, is fear has gripped their heart. Right? So the fuad is inflamed to a point whereby they don't know what to do. They don't know who you are. They don't know whether to come out or to stay in the car. They have no idea what to... So the trust in Allah is where that becomes strengthened. Okay, this is the situation. There's nothing you can do about the situation. Now, if you can fix it, fix it. If you can't, surrender your will to Allah. Let Him fix it for you. Right? That gives you the strength and resolution to keep moving forward or to get out of that state and to continue with your life forward. Because again, as Ghazali says, you need to return back to your purpose of being. You cannot be stuck in a moment, in a circumstance that's dragging you down.
I have a question though.
Mm-hmm.
How do you explain how is the shahwa and the ghadab outside of the nafs? Is it related to the temptations, that the temptations are in the external environment, and it's only when you allow them to affect you is when it goes inside the nafs?
So the way you would probably picture this is where your body meets your soul. There's that intermediary in between. All the senses, the hands, the feet, the organs, all these things are they are the seats, as Ghazali says, they are the seats of the shahwa and the ghadab. The brain is the seat for the aql. So all these three aspects, they meet the body in these environs, and they are at the very edge of the nafs, of the soul. So if you were to do like a spherical representation, at the very center you would have the heart. And then outside the heart, the second sphere would be the soul. And then right at the boundary of the soul is where you will have the shahwa and the ghadab. And that boundary is where now the outermost layer would be the body. So they're like right on the outer edge. They're not on the more inner side.
That's why, like, usually when you give in to anger and or your desire, it's like you do it like you don't even think about it. You just like it's like a passion, like a passionate soul. So like with a passionate soul to be like someone who's not connected with their inner soul. It's just they're simply, literally, physically like.
Yeah, it's instinctive.
Outer,
It's instinctive, yeah. It's almost like you aren't really thinking at that moment, you're just reacting. Yeah.
And then Mishkat is the niche into the nafs. And the nafs is the whole soul, but then the Sadr is like the part that's surrounding the qalb, the center of it.
Yeah.
So you put the aql on the Sadr. How is that?
So the aqaliyah, the intellective process begins from the Sadr as that information is coming through. Yeah. So it begins from there and it goes through this line of sort of reasoning. You go through a line of reasoning, right? So if you want to break it down on paper, you would ask what an object is, or what is the situation, what is the circumstance, what is he saying. You're getting like outward information. Then you go through like a process of ratification. Okay, what are the details now? How did he, then what did you say? Was it like this? Was it like that? You sort of do this elimination process until you arrive at a conclusion. And then from that point is now you're going into really the innermost aspects, the alam al-ghaib. Now you're going into the unknown portion. So that's known as qiyas, that's known as reasoning, right? And they say min al-majhul, min al-ma'lum ila al-majhul, from the known to the unknown is the process of reasoning, of qiyas. So that's the intellective process is all that. And that has got hierarchies as well. There's the logical understanding of things, then there is the ontological understanding of things, and then there is the teleological understanding of things. So logical, you're just looking at the dhahiri aspect of things, outward. What do you see from just the outward perception of things? And then you take it as you've understood it. If you stop there, then your understanding is deficient. When you go into ontology, you're investigating the true reality of things. What is it really? What really happened? Yeah, you're saying he hit you. We accept that. We say, okay, fine, he hit you. There's evidence to show that you're bleeding through your nose, right? Okay, that's the outward. Yeah, but what really happened in this case? And that's when your investigative process shows that you actually offended him. That's why he hit you. That's the ontology, right? Then the teleology is generally the purpose. Is there a reason why this happened? Could it have been avoided? Well, what's the, now you're actually trying to now get to the nth of it. This in the Quran is called tadabbur. Dabara it's really to go to the end of something. Self-reflection entails an act of going from the outward to the more inward. You're looking into yourself, to the teleological side of things. This is what I did. This is how I did it. Why did I do it? Was there a reason? Okay, this is what he said and this is how I did. You can justify your actions in that case. For instance, you said, I told him off because, he was just acting like a donkey. And I just told him off. So that's the outward, that's the logical aspect of it. Cause and effect. He did this, you did that back to him. Ontology, what really happened in that situation? This is where you begin to question yourself, say, I could have held myself back. I could have just turned away. I could have ignored him, right? Then you go to the teleology and recognize that there are no coincidences. This happened for a reason. What's the reason? Was the reason so that I could tell the other person off? Or was the reason on a more deeper level so that I could discover my weakness, that I reacted without any justification on a deeper level? That's the reason, that's the purpose why Allah put that in front of you, in your way. So now that actually takes you to a higher level of intelligence. That's known as Lubb. That's that innermost aspect of that diagram, the Lubb. Lubb means, I'm not going to spend too much time on Lubb because it's very complicated. But Lubb essentially means core or essence or quintessence. It's the innermost. And Allah refers to them al-ulul albab or ulul albab. those who are of the deepermost understanding. Because it is to them that the bab, right, or the albab, the doors to the unseen realities open. They begin to comprehend bigger and more. Only when you are in that state of intelligence. That's the highest intelligence, the purest form of intelligence. And you will find here that if the Fuaad is inflamed, it prevents the Lubb from seeing, because it is the outer form of the Lubb. So if the Fuaad, your emotions are overwhelming you, the Lubb is not intellecting onto what needs to be done. So Musa in that situation, her Fuaad was so inflamed that her Lubb farigha, her innermost became empty. She couldn't think, right? She couldn't intellect. And so the strength comes from within. Allah puts the strength in you. And the believer gets that strength. Even though you can't figure out what to do, trust in Allah. Right?
And so when you calm down the information, then that's when the light from the Lubb can come through.
Yeah.
So the ruh connects to the Lubb and then the Fuad, and then goes towards the nafs.
That's essentially the connection. So really, to access the spiritual side, to be inclined towards the spiritual side, there should be true intellection taking place. And if you remember back what true intellection, one of the scholars said, is it begins when you have detached from the causal world. That's where true intellection begins, because now you are headed towards a divine reality, not this material cause and effect kind of a deal. So the qalb, Raghab al-Isfahani gives a definition of the qalb. He says, tasrifuhu wa sarfuhu an wajhi. It is like the inflecting and the exchanging, or the turning something from one face to another. So the qalb is something that's always turning. And there's always a different state that a person is in. You are either in an emotive state or an intellective state, or both, or it is quiet, or the outward aspects have taken over. So the state of the believer changes throughout the day. I believe one of the hadith says that the believer's hal changes about 40 times in a day. And all the derivatives of the term qalb linguistically express this turning over of something. And so the Quran says, wa ilayhi tuqlabun, right? Inna ila rabbina munqalibun, or wa inna ila rabbina lamunqalibun, and to their Lord, to our Lord do we turn back, do we return, right? That's what the qalb is. So the qalb is in this middle ground. If you remember, sanurihim ayatina fil afaqi wa fi anfusihim, we are in this central aspect between the spirit or the spiritual realms and this material world, the lower world, and we are constantly turning or shifting between the two, but the heart is inclined towards the other. And so قَدْ أَفْلَهَ مَنْ زَكَّهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Dassa is when you drive a wedge, you prevent the heart from its natural inclination. That wedge is what the devils try to do. By casting that shadow of doubt, that uncertainty, by throwing those waswasa at you, it's a wedge. It creates an obstacle, especially when you accept it as a truth. That's a big issue. And this is why being intellectually strengthened is a gift and it's a necessity. Seeking knowledge is a wajiba on every Muslim, because knowledge empowers you from distinguishing truth from lie. Otherwise, you would take the lie as truth, and that lie actually drives a wedge between you, meaning your inner reality, and the realm that you are inclined towards. So a lot of people get alluded, they think that this material world is the true world. A material reality is the true reality. And that's a wedge, because it's preventing them from seeing the divine reality. That's the dasa, and it's preventing them from looking into that direction.
Is it the Sadr that gets blackened over time, since that's the glass?
No, the heart gets blackened over time. That's the glass. As zujaja is the heart, and it gets blackened. It gets,
Is under the Sadr.
It's inside the Sadr, yeah. So you would look at this as an inner reality. Since we are talking about the human being's inner reality, then you kind of, if you want to picture it, and I know it's difficult because this is like the best representation I could do in diagrammatically. It's difficult to really understand this, but it takes time to kind of wrap your head around it. You would just look at it like layers of an onion, for example. There's one layer underneath another layer underneath another layer. So you've got the body, then the soul, then the Sadr, then the heart, qalb, and then the Fuaad, and then the Lubb, and then there are other inner dimensions that we probably don't know of. Like I would say consciousness is deep within the Lubb, but there could be other layers in between that we don't really know of.
So Allah is in full contact with the ruh at all times, because without it he wouldn't be living. And then the ruh, that's also where knowledge comes in as well. And it goes through the Lubb, the Fuaad, and then the qalb. So if you have a clean heart, a clean qalb, then you will be able to easily deflect against all the shahwa and the ghadab and the alamul, shahada. Does shahada mean witness?
Shahada is witnessing, yeah.
So all the illusionary world, basically, you'll be able to look through it. It makes sense.
Yeah, I'll give you a very profound example of Imam Junaid. Imam Al-Junaid recognized throughout the Ummah as a very spiritual individual, and his tariqah of tasawwuf is recognized even among those who are, say Sufism is condemned. Imam Al-Junaid, he had a tamani, like he wanted to meet Iblis. Just to satisfy his curiosity, he wanted to meet Iblis and ask him, like, what happened? Why didn't you just do what you were supposed to do? So Iblis eventually came to him as a hideous old man and frightened Imam Al-Junaid, like, what are you? What's going on here? And so the old man said, don't you recognize me? I'm the one you wanted to meet. And he said, you're Iblis, you're the one who was cast out of the heavens. And he said, yeah. And said, I just have one question for you. Like, why didn't you just do it? Why didn't you just prostrate when you were told to do it? You were right there. Like, what a fool. What was going through your mind at the time? It just seems like completely illogical. It's such a straightforward commandment from your Lord, and you were in the presence of your Lord. How could you deny that? Is what he was trying to say. Like, we have people here comparatively can be forgiven in that regard, that they have never met God, they don't know of him, and they reject, that makes more sense. They haven't gotten the message yet, but you were right there. So Iblis said, and this is his persuasion, his logic, and it's logically sound what he says. He said, how can I bow down to other than God himself? Which is a very logical thing to do. And I know a lot of people have actually examined it from that perspective and have used that as an excuse, that we don't accept anyone. We don't accept it except Allah, right?
Well, Allah made Adam the representative at that moment.
Yeah, and Allah gave a direct commandment, and yet, so what Iblis is telling Imam Al-Junaid is, how can I prostrate to anyone other than God? Because in Islam, prostration was prohibited, whereas if you look in previous cultures, it was not prohibited in that sense. Prostration is a sign, is an act of respect. In like the Hindu culture and the Chinese, it was there before. The naskh of that commandment to all of humanity, not just Muslims, came with the revelation with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the naskh. It's an abrogated act. So prior to that, it wasn't something that was worshipful. That's what the ulama say, that the prostration of the angels was not a worshipful act to Adam. It was just an obedience of a commandment. So Iblis is using that logical standpoint, and it sounds very convincing what he's saying. And Imam Al-Junaid, as he recalls it, he says, I almost believed him. But in that moment, something sparked in my heart. And I remembered, he's a liar. He's lying to me. You see? He's trying to justify his own actions. It's, you see, the heart, Imam Al-Junaid was almost swayed in that moment, but his heart is the heart of a believer. And so the certainty that he was looking for, it comes from his trust in Allah, that Allah will give him the truth. Whatever the external individual is lying to me, Allah gives me the truth, because He understands that other reality. A lot of people are presented with lies in television and all that, and they accept it as truth. It must be true because there's an authoritative figure saying it, but they don't actually have an understanding of a true reality to be able to distinguish the truth from lie. So the Fuaad, and if you look at the Fuaad and the Qalb now, there is an interesting relation between the two. And I'll give you another example, and this is a very profound example of the Prophet ﷺ himself during his journey of Mi'raj. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Najm, مَا كَذَبَ الْفُؤَادُ مَا رَأَى. It's ayah number 11, Surah An-Najm. To translate that, his Fuad did not lie of what it saw. His Fuad did not lie concerning what it saw during that journey. So there are two things we derive from this ayah. Number one, the Fuad can see, it can perceive, it can recognize. Number two, it can also deceive, it can lie. And this is when it is overwhelmed. In some cases, the emotions are right, the feeling is right, but in some cases, when they get inflamed and they get overwhelmed, they can deceive you from what really needs to take place or what really needs to be perceived. So on his journey, the Prophet ﷺ, you can just imagine this. I mean, it's not something we can really comprehend unless we are actually there, but just imagine this, that all of a sudden, in one night, within a span of a few hours, you are exposed to the samawat. You're seeing everything. You're seeing to the furthest horizon, the furthest point of the lot tree, Sidratul Muntaha. Just imagine what is your state at that time, in that moment. I mean, we go to anywhere else other than where we're living, just on this earth. We go to a mountain scenery or somewhere, and it's a breathtaking environment, and you just feel that elevation, and sometimes, you know, it can really overwhelm you just here in this earthly domain. Now you're exposed to the expanse of the samawat, the heavens. That can really destroy an individual, and people do end up in that situation. They get slightly exposed to the spiritual worlds, and it drives them insane. It does. It drives them insane if they are not prepared for it. The process of tazkiyah in this world is to prepare you for that world, for that akhirah, when everything is revealed, right? The veil is lifted. Now you can see everything.
Is this connected to, like, a person will be in hell or a state of hell and fear because they never even believed of anything other than this material world? So even just experiencing their judgment, they're already in hell. They're already kind of in a state of, you know, torture because of all the regret and all the, so much things are happening at once, you know, all the disbelievers on the day of judgment.
Well, you're in that moment, you're actually seeing everything without a filter. Right now, one of the scholars say that one of the ni'mas that Allah has put on us is to have this veil in place. Because if we saw the world for what it really was, we wouldn't be able to handle it. There's an interesting thing I heard from Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. He spoke about his teacher, Murabitul Hajj, and he was there in Mauritania, and he was just observing him teach another student. And what he did is he took some sand and he blew the sand, and there was dust in the air. And he was telling him, the student, that if the veil was lifted from your eyes, this is how you would see the world. And that is overwhelming because it can drive you insane. Imagine seeing the world in its finest divisible particle possible. Seeing the world as atoms, for instance. How would you comprehend reality? How would you classify objects? How would you figure out which way to go? Imagine seeing your own body in its true natural state, where Allah is no longer holding all the pieces together. It would drive you insane. Now, on Yawmul Qiyamah, you're no longer in a material world, right? It's now you've already transcended material world. You've moved on. This is why it's called Akhirah. It's the next, right? You understand what I'm saying?
And then you have like a dream or a nightmare, and you wake up and you're like, oh, Allah, like, thank you for that little thing, but okay, I'm good. Now I see why we have this limited, field of vision. It's good that we can't see all the bacteria around us. It's good that we can't.
Yeah, it would drive you insane. I mean, think about it. If you could just see the germs, even just on you, you would be crazy. So now imagine that you are in the Akhirah. You're at that point where Allah is saying, لَقَدْ كُنْتَ فِي غَفْلَةٍ مِنْ هَذَا فَكَشَفْنَا عَنْكَ غِطَاءَكَ فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيد. You were heedless about this reality. You didn't know about this. You never even bothered to find out, to understand or comprehend it. And because of a lack of comprehension, now the veil has been removed and your eye is seeing everything. You're seeing reality. And you don't have the spiritual strength to encompass it. The very fact that you guys are here right now and you're striving to understand this unseen reality is a step towards strengthening your heart for when the veil is removed. Because think about that situation whereby Allah says that everything is going to be made to testify against you. How do you comprehend that? Your hands are going to speak against you. Your tongue is going to speak against you. How do you comprehend that? When these people, when the kuffar see these kinds of ayat, they laugh. Oh, how is that supposed to be possible? It is a possibility, and it will be a possibility. Now, when the veil is lifted, and that's a surety that the veil will be lifted, you will be there. How are you going to comprehend, digest what you're seeing in that moment? When the entirety of your being, you are focused only on what made scientific sense. So long as it made scientific sense, and this doesn't make scientific sense, how are you going to apply scientific sense on Yawm al-Qiyamah? Anyway, my point was that in that moment that the Prophet ﷺ was there, it is a moment that any normal individual would completely lose it. And the emotion that would be overwhelming them would deceive them from what they were meant to do in that moment, their purpose. But in the Prophet's circumstance here, we are told, مَا كَذَبَ الْفُؤَادِ. His Fuaad did not lie to him, did not deceive him. It was focused. It was under control. He felt the emotion. That doesn't mean he was emotionless. He felt it. He knew what he was experiencing. And that's the point. He knew what he was experiencing. He knew where he was, and he had his focus, and he knew which direction he wanted to go. And this is what Ghazali says, is that if you really want to succeed in the contentment of the heart, then you need to make this divine presence your objective, your qibla, and your akhirah as your resolution. So long as you have that in your focus, nothing else is going to disturb you, no matter how strange it might be. If Dajjal was to knock on your door right now, when you're prepared with that knowledge and you understand who he is, what he's going to do, what the repercussions or possible outcomes are going to be, if he knocks on your door, you are likely to be less disturbed by his presence than somebody who was completely ignorant about him and assumed that he doesn't exist, right? Because you have that knowledge, it gives you that strength, the certainty. And this is what Allah says in beginning of that surah, Ma dalla sahibukum wa ma ghawa. Your companion did not go astray, nor was he erred, nor was he mistaken in any way. وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. He did not speak, he does not speak, he does not express, he does not manifest out of his whims. He doesn't just act on his shahwa or his ghadab. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى. It is but a revelation revealed. He is acting only on that. And that's what's strengthening his heart. That's what's keeping him sane in this extraordinary event. It's keeping his mind focused on what he wants to achieve. His heart only wants to be in the divine presence. It is not concerned about, oh, look at these stars and look at this and look at what's going on here and look at those guys. Even when he's seeing all these human beings being in Jahannam and he's seeing the different kinds of punishments they're going through, his heart is still strengthened. He's not lost it. Because if you were to see that happening, you would lose it. That's it. That's what he's saying. He was prepared for this moment. You see, it didn't just come about because he had super special powers. He was prepared for it. It was a process he had to go through, and that strengthened his heart for that circumstance when it occurred. So that when the circumstance happened, it doesn't set you off. And the same example can be applied to our dunyawi circumstances. So the fact that Musa, for example, she was overcome by the emotion, but then Allah strengthened her by the faith that she had and the trust that she had in her Lord, and that stilled her emotions and gave her yaqeen. Certainty is what you're looking for, because uncertainty makes you anxious. It puts you in a state of anxiety. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that innal insana khuliqa hulu'a. Hulu'a is anxiety. Allah is saying indeed mankind was created in a state of anxiety. And then he says, illa al-musallin, except those who are in prayer. And it's not just a 5 times daily prayer, right? It's not just that. It's that they are constantly in prayer. Alladina hum ala salatihim daimun. They are always in prayer. It's like you're always remembering Allah. And that's the nature of the heart. The diseases that perturb the heart are of 2 kinds. There are shubuhat and then there's shahawat. Shahawat are the desires. Those are what we are focusing on in the text of Al-Ghazali. The shubuhat are those that cause doubt. The sense of doubt, uncertainty, obscurity, suspicion, these are antonymic to yaqeen, to certainty. In certainty, when you are in a state of certainty, you are tranquil, you are still. And the heart wants stillness. It doesn't like turbulence. It wants stillness. It wants tranquility. If somebody is fearful of a certain outcome, for instance, whereby you are now concerned about an occurrence which you have got no ratification over. In other words, you're in a circumstance, something has happened to you, and you just do not know how to make sense of what just happened. And because you cannot make sense of what it is, you don't know how it's going to materialize. This is the algorithmic flow. You need to know what it is before you can move on to understanding how it's going to take place, and then what the outcomes are going to be. And because you can't understand that, you can't actually move on to a process of ratification which will give you that tasdeeq, that conclusion with which you can have a certainty of sorts. So the heart is always going to be in that turbulating state. You're always going to be bouncing around. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this is, what if? And you start heading in all different directions, trying to look for an answer. The similitude of that is Hajar and Ismail. She just had no clue what to do. I have no idea what I'm going to do in this situation. Here is my baby. He's starving. I cannot feed him. I have no food. I have no water. I don't know what to do. And so what does she do in that state? She's agitated. She's running back and forth, trying to find a solution. And the response comes, and it's very astounding. It's in the Bible as well. Clear account. Fear not. Don't get agitated. God has heard the child. He's going to take care of him. And the solution comes out from there. That puts certainty in the heart. Because if you continue down that path where you are just continuously turbulating, you can't find a solution to what you're looking for, then your heart is going to get infected. And that's going to manifest in a disease. And that disease is going to extend from the spiritual disease into a physical disease. Because what affects the heart will eventually affect the body. Because if the heart, the sultan, cannot manage itself, in that allegory that Ghazali gives, then the city is going to deteriorate. The soul is going to go out of balance. Then the kingdom is going to fall. The body is going to suffer. See, the contingency is you're going to have a ripple effect from that. And this is because a sound heart has trust, and a sick heart has doubt. That's just the shell of it. That's the blueprint. The pure heart does not worry. And it's notable in children. If you look at children, children are never worried. They're not concerned about what they're going to eat, because they have faith that my parents will feed me. They'll get agitated when they're hungry, because that's a shahwa. It needs to be fulfilled, right? As hunger needs to be fulfilled. But they don't have that deep-set concern in them. And they will only get concerned or worried when they themselves do something wrong. Then they know they're in trouble. And that's the heart. That's the nature of the heart. When you commit a sin, when you do something wrong, that's when you start getting worried. You get agitated. Because then the heart is perturbed by mistakes. It's perturbed by errors. So going back to that ayah in Surah An-Najm, right? He says, Ma dalla sahibukum wa ma ghawa. Your companion he didn't go astray. He didn't make mistakes. This is why his heart was strong enough to deal with what he was going to face.
I was going to mention the reason why Allah waits until a prophet is like 40 years old until he gives them revelation, because he has to allow them to strengthen their heart, right? Like before the Prophet met Jibreel alayhi salam, he was seeing dreams, and he was seeing the rocks and everything take land to him. So it was all preparing him for that big moment when he sees Jibreel alayhi salam.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. That age of 40 is also what the scholars call it's the age of maturity, right? So at 40 you are at your peak maturity, and so you're also able to handle. The Prophet would be able to handle this weight of revelation being given to them. But that process is also preparing them mentally, physically. And the Prophet went through this process of self-isolating, meditation, really emptying himself. Kana yatathabbatu is what the hadith says. He used to empty himself, so he could receive revelation. Some of the ulama say that Jibreel squeezed him 3 times just to make sure he was completely empty of himself, so that he could receive revelation so that those mistakes, when the heart makes a mistake, when the being makes a mistake, when he sins, when he's in error, when there's a lapse of judgment, when you missed a step, when you, in that situation, for instance, whereby you did not execute your mind in terms of figuring out how you're going to get out of the situation, and your anger took over, or your shahwa took over, puts the heart in a state of agitation. Because since the ghadab and the shahwa cannot think for themselves, they're just reactionary, 9 times out of 10 they'll make the wrong decision, and now the heart has to deal with the consequences, and so that puts the heart in a state of agitation. But for the Prophet ﷺ, why he had kana ahlam an-nas, he was the most forbearing of people. He had the most forbearance. One of the Jews tried to test him, and he tested him in so many different aspects, but at one point he started insulting him. and calling him names and stuff. But the Prophet was quiet. He didn't react. He didn't shout back. And the Sahaba were getting very agitated at this guy's behavior. But when he said afterwards, and he became a Muslim, he accepted Islam, he said that I was looking for, I knew all the signs of prophethood. I was looking for this one sign that would really confirm to me that he is the messenger of Allah. And that was forbearance. He was able to withstand whatever I sent at him, and he did not react back to me. This is the strength that the Prophet ﷺ achieved, that ensured that however many difficulties he faced in his life, he was able to overcome them and find a solution and keep moving forward until he attained the success that had been ordained for him. It was a difficult path, undoubtedly, from the very beginning, from the moment of his prophethood. It was a very difficult path, but there was success in the end. And the fruits of his success are still being echoed today, right? 14 centuries later, they're still being echoed, and they'll be continually echoed till the end. And the same applies to our scholars and the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Tabi'in. All of them, they exemplified this prophetic principle. This is why Allah is saying, "Ma dhalla sahibukum wa ma ghawa." He did not deviate. He stuck to it. That focus that he had as Allah as his qibla, as his goal, and the akhirah as his resolution, he maintained that focus. Irrespective of what hit him, he did not go astray. Wa ma ghawa, he did not make mistakes, because he used his aql in all his aspects. He maintained a wisdom, a wise application in his actions. وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى, he did not act or speak or express out of his whims and desires. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى, it is that he maintained his focus on revelation. And it is revelation that will give you this tranquility that you're looking for. This diagrammatic representation can be summarized in an ayah. The ayah is in Surah Al-Hajj, ayah number 34. Ayah number 46. أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, will they not travel in the land? فَتَكُونَ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا, that they have hearts with which to intellect, to understand. أَوْ آذَانٌ يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا, or they have ears which they can listen. They can hear the melody with which Allah has created everything, the beauty of revelation. فَإِنَّهَا, and Allah says, فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَى الْأَبْصَارِ, it's not that the eyes are blind. It's not that the physical eyes, they can see 20/20 vision. Everything can be analyzed. They can excavate. They can do their carbon dating and everything, make their presuppositions about everything, put the facts and publish them. That doesn't help them reach understanding. وَلَكِنْ تَعْمَى الْقُلُوبِ, rather it is their hearts that are blinded. الَّتِي فِي الصُّدُورِ, that are in the Sadr, that are in the heart, in the chest. The heart that is in the chest is the hub of understanding. It is the thing that does the intellection. And so the heart, we say, just in conclusion, it is the heart has been created to seek a contentment. It has been created for tranquility. It wants to be tranquil. It wants to be sound. Anything that occurs will perturb it. It's going to agitate it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ra'd, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُمْ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, those who believe and their hearts found contentment in the remembrance of Allah. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, indeed, it is in the remembrance of Allah that the heart finds contentment. And this remembrance is not just the dhikr of the tasbih, right? That's a dhikr in and of itself. It's an all-encompassing dhikr. It's that you keep this, the way Ghazali says, you keep this divine presence as your all. In other words, everything that you do, you remember Allah. And you remember Him not only in the sense of mentioning His name, but in understanding Him. And the way you understand Him is through His speech. That's the most intimate that you can get with your Creator. It's the Quran. Because those are His words, right? The lover, the most intimate that a lover can get in absence of his beloved is in the words that they write. It's in the poems that they compose for them, in the letters that they write. In their absence, that's the closest you feel to them. So it's the speech of Allah that you will feel closest to when you understand that speech. And in the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ says, the people will gather, they don't gather in the house of Allah. يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ. They recite the kitab of Allah, the book of Allah. And tilawa to the qari means execution in recitation, eloquency in recitation. But to the faqih, who is somebody who understands the sharia, tilawa means to recite and to follow up, is to implement what you're reciting. In other words, you need to understand what you're reciting in order to implement it. So yatluna kitab Allah, they recite and follow up on the kitab, on the book of Allah. وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُم. And they study the book between themselves, together. They study the book together. إِلَّا نَزَّلَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّكِينَةِ. Except that there transcends upon them sakina. Because when you understand the speech of your Lord, you become intimately familiar with Him. And that brings and descends upon you sakina. That sakina is what takes away the anxiety. Right? This is what in that other ayah when He says, Innal insana khuliqa hulu'a. Mankind is created in a state of anxiety. How does he find resolution? How does he find contentment or tranquility? Illa al-musallin, except those who are in constant prayer, right? And not just prayer 5 times a day. Alladina hum ala salatihim daimun. They are always in prayer, right? So, alhamdulillah, let's stop there, inshallah. Unless there are any questions. I tried to execute that in the best way I thought would help you understand.
Oh, I was just going to say, Jazakallah khairan also for mentioning the part of the heart and how it'll always be in ajala unless it has yaqeen. I thought that was a really profound statement, especially now within our Western society. We're constantly catching on to philosophies that are fleeting, that are ever changing, and that is making people literally sick. And as well, it also, I remember we spoke privately about some matters, and it really, this particular point really hit home. So
alhamdulillah, 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 mashallah.
Jazakallah khair. You started this out with language,
Mm-hmm.
the essential language, relaying what is eternal. And you ended it with always remembrance of Allah, always praying to Allah. So, is it possible that every single aspect of your life you can try to find what Allah is how Allah is trying to speak to you? What is He trying to relate to you? If you're in constant prayer, then things happen. It's almost like, okay, what is Allah trying to tell me with this action? Is that a sound way to look at this reality?
Well, in my view, the best way to look at it is not to say Allah is trying to speak to you. That's typically the Christian theological point of view. God is trying to reach out to you. That's what the Christians believe. We would say that Allah has already reached out to you. It's we who are trying to reach out to Him. So it's the heart that's seeking to understand the Lord. He already sent the message to you, right? So Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi, when he gives his definition of the Quran, he gives it in a very specific way. He says, Da'watul khalq ila ibadatillah. He doesn't say Da'watul da'watul haq ila al-khalq. And what that means is, what he's saying is that da'watul khalq means that it's mudaf mudafun ilay. It's the invitation of the creation, which is strange when you think about it, because if I'm inviting you to my house, it's my invitation, right? But here, the way he's expressing it, he's saying the invitation has already been given to mankind. And in which case now mankind is in possession of the invitation. All he has to do is honor the invitation. So we are the ones who are trying to seek out an understanding. It's not God who's trying to tell us anything. He's already told us what he needs to say. It's us who are trying to understand it.
So essentially, if we want to revamp the education system, all we really need to start doing is to help students, young children, and even teenagers and adults recognize to learn themselves. And in turn, they will essentially learn about the world.
Yeah, essentially, yes. It's a bit more difficult in that sense, because how do you explain inner realities to a child? It would come in like a step-by-step sort of format. Because children tend to ask a lot of why questions, but they're too lazy to understand what and how. Because that's a long process, right? To go through that understanding. They want the answer immediately. So they'll ask questions like, why do we do that? And why do we say that? Children will usually say, why is that man fat? When he shouldn't say that he's fat, right? And then you'll tell them you shouldn't say that. I'll say, yeah, but why shouldn't we say it? And how do you explain to them the intricacies of societal behavior? But generally with children, depending on their age group and their level of comprehension, I believe this is something that can be taught to them. What's being indoctrinated right now is a clear example that children are eager to learn and they want to understand the world. We just have to guide them. We're not meant to put ideas in their mind. Our job is the tarbiyah. We just have to guide them along. Allah is the one who will lead them to enlightenment. I believe the Muslims always understood it in that regard. And this is why our scholars really were the greatest scholars in history. I don't think anyone can compare our scholars in that regard. The fact that they uncovered so much with less of instrumentation and more of just an understanding of reality. Whereas today you need all these instruments to understand something. Ghazali is talking about the frontal cortex and the neocortex and the compartments of the brain at a time when they didn't even have the tools to break apart the brain and study it, or the machinery to trace neurological functions. And people today, with all their sophistication, still can't comprehend the basics of how the brain functions. They're still wondering how these things happen. But our education systems, unfortunately, and it's not just me saying, it's not just Muslims who are criticizing. I mean, people in the West as well, those who have sensibility, and I'm not saying people just like that, renowned scholars, people who have been known for their scholarship in education, have said that, unfortunately, we are ruining these minds from comprehending an intrinsic value of life, and we are indoctrinating them with an extrinsic value of life. This is the variance between an extrinsic value is something that has like a monetary affiliation. Its value is gauged by something else, right? So this object here, I would say, costs $20. So $20 is its extrinsic value. That's the price tag. Its value is determined by the currency. But to me, it's more than $20. I wouldn't even give it a price because I love this pen. This is my primary pen. I write all my Arabic text with it and it comes out beautifully according to me. I love it. So I wouldn't even give this a value of dollar, but I will guard this with my life if I have to, because now it has an intrinsic value. It's paying for itself in a much more deeper level with me. When you give things an extrinsic value, the value in your life is never satisfied. That's why the materialism never satisfies the heart. But when you give them intrinsic values, then the thing might be something cheap, but it has a greater value in your life. If we teach our children to understand it from that perspective, that it doesn't matter which toy you have or what food you eat, so long as you find satisfaction in it and contentment, you'll be fine and you'll be happy. And there are children who grow up in that mode and they're happy. I mean, people are generally happy that they grew up poor. They don't have regrets that they never had money, you know. They had hardships, yes, but they don't have regrets. They didn't have all these material affiliations. I think this is what we need to teach our children instead of just plopping them in front of screens and TVs and iPads and all these things. In fact, this whole idea now that education is taking a paradigm shift towards online learning for children, I think that's a very dangerous thing, because they're completely going to lose value in a classroom and the etiquette of learning and the precious intrinsic value of knowledge itself. They're going to lose that. We need to do something about this. I don't know. For adults, it's a different case. We are mature enough to comprehend that these are just tools and instruments. But for children, they don't know these things. They're just enticed by this amazing device where an image can appear and tell me what to do. This is what they're going to be taking their information from, and they're not going to receive any knowledge from that, and they'll never have value for knowledge. It's one of the signs as we're headed towards the latter days, towards the end, that knowledge will be lifted from the hearts of men. These are the footsteps, right? These are the traces of that taking place. Knowledge is no longer settling in people's hearts. It's settling on their hard drives and their devices, and they're taking that as knowledge to begin with, whereas it's only data and information.
There was one thing you spoke about naming, and we didn't go about it this particular thing, but something intrinsic, when you give it name, now it has so much more value.
Mm-hmm.
The Prophet he gave name
yes.
to his ashya,
yes.
things, and they weren't that great. If you can speak on that a little bit.
Yes, he named his things, and he had a personal connection with his things. Those personal connections, they're not to be mistaken as he had like a love for material things, but he had a personal connection with the objects in his life. He had very few items in his possession, and he named them. Now, the thing about naming in this case is not just giving a name that's a tagline, right? Like a barcode or something like that. It's not just a name. And this is why when we speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't just say Asma'ul Husna by itself. It's Asma wa Sifa, right? It is names and attributes, because the name carries the attribute. The name has a meaning, and that meaning gives it character. And so even for individuals themselves, people, the names that you have been given, you should never downplay your name. Like this idea of shortening your name from Muhammad to Mo, or whatever. This is it's disgusting. And it speaks to how low of a character you have and respect you have of yourself, even because that name has an attribute and you have to embellish that attribute. It's not just a tagline to you. It's something that you have to fulfill. In terms of your possessions, the Prophet gave his everything. He named them because, number one, this is in fulfillment of the Quran. We know things by naming them. And by that knowing, it's not just knowing factual information about them, it's really knowing their true essence. Like, what does this thing mean to you? Why would you give a book a title? What does it mean? Right? Why would you name the things why is the Quran called or given a name? Al-Quran, Al-Furqan, Al-Dhikr, At-Tanzil. Why is it given those names? Those names have meanings, and those meanings are profound, and there's a personal connection. The Christians, they use the word gospel, first of all, is a translated word. It is not its original name. It's translated. Number two, whenever they refer to it as the Bible. What does Bible mean? Bible is from the Greek word biblios, which means book. So it's just a book. But when you elevate it, we don't call our Quran kitab. You don't say, I'm going to recite kitab, right? You don't say, I'm going to read kitab or let's study kitab. No, you say, I'm going to recite the Quran. I'm going to read the Quran. I'm going to study the Quran. You still refer to it by the name because there is an intimate connection. And Dr. Omar Farooq has a very profound statement in one of his lectures concerning the fitrah. He says that in order for there to be a complete understanding of something, there has to be an intimate connection between the knower and the thing that is to be known. There has to be a connection, an intimate connection between the two. And it's only then that the one who wants to know can come to know of the thing. So if I want to know you, I'm not going to know you by your hairstyle and your beard and your skin color and how big is your nose. Those are all accidentals. Those are all arad. If I want to know you, I'll ask you by knowing who you are. And the first thing I will come to know is your name. That will help me understand the next portion of who you are, where you're from, what do you do. But I have to know your name first. And it's the name that keeps in memory. That's what I remember. And so that creates an intrinsic value between things, between objects, between people and things. And let's not forget, we are in this world, we are part of creation. So everything else around us has an equal right to this domain. We're not just here because we are more intelligent than everything else. Everything else has an equal right in creation. So true enlightenment is knowing the proper place of things, knowing your proper place in relation to yourself, number one. Number two, knowing your proper place in relation to everything else, and likewise knowing the proper place of each thing in relation to each and every other thing. And then finally, knowing the proper place of creation to the creator. So everything has a proper place, has a purpose, has a reason for being. And it has to be given an intrinsic value, not an extrinsic value. This idea of evaluating trees based on how much paper costs, or how much each barrel of oil costs. Each barrel of oil might cost $100 to you on the stock market, but to that poor family who has nothing but to rely on that small can of oil to cook their food, it costs a lot more. It has a deeper value, right? So everything is not measured by dollars. Naming things has a divine element, there's a reason why the Prophet did it. And I believe if we abide by that sunnah, we wouldn't go astray. We would really value the things we have in life. We wouldn't just throw them out to end up filling up landmines and just creating the kind of mess that we are living in today, and then start complaining about climate change and global warming and all that stuff. Okay, let's end there then, inshallah. سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بارك الله فيكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.